Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a KIM New Mandatory edition of Monster Party.
Monster Party.
Monster Party.
Monster Party.
Monster Party. Oh, man. Am I excited?
It's festive.
Yes, this
This
is gonna be a good one.
This is going to be quite the episode. And I don't even want to waste any time. For once, I do not want to waste any time.
Thank goodness. for once.
Exactly, right. It's my new leaf, Larry. But
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Speaking of a new leaf, I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm SHAWN Sheridan.
I'm Larry STROTHE.
And I'm James Gonis.
And for this episode, since our topic and our guest are so intertwined, I would like to now hand over this segment to SHAWN Sheridan. SHAWN, take it away.
Why, thank you. Our guest is an award-winning film critic, journalist, author, and horror movie authority. He has written many books. Some of his nonfiction books include Nightmare Cinema, A Critical History of the Horror Film, Millennium Movies, End of the World Cinema, the BFI Companion to Horror. Some of his novels include the popular Anno Dracula book series, and this is a collection of novels that feature characters from Bram Stoker's Dracula in an alternate history, pitting Dracula and other vampires against both real-life figures and fictional characters throughout history. He has a new book coming out as well later this year called A Christmas Ghost Story, about a nightmarish Christmas set in the English countryside. And our guest has also provided his expertise on countless DVD and Blu-ray extras for vintage genre films, as well as numerous audio commentaries for classic and not so classic horror and sci-fi movies. And if you're wondering what the title of this episode is, it incorporates our guest. This episode is called Let's Scare KIM NEWMAN to Death, Hidden Horror Gems of the 70s. So please welcome KIM NEWMAN.
KIM NEWMAN! Woo!
Welcome.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Very glad to be here.
Well, Kim, before we kind of delve into this topic, I wanted to ask you about your first exposure to horror cinema, which, if I'm not mistaken, involved a classic Universal horror film. What got you into the whole area?
Certainly, I always think of it, that moment where the bat flies through the window and Bruce Wayne decides what the rest of his life is going to be.
Right.
For me, that was watching Bela Lugosi's Dracula late night on television in 1971. Thanks to the wonders of now being able to research stuff, I could even track down the date if I wanted to.
Wow.
But it was one of those things. I mean, obviously, I was 11. Which I think is the age that quite a lot of us get involved in genre fiction. And this was the beginning of the 1970s. So, of course, you've got to think, I was a British kid in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. And the 1960s, we tend to mythologize it a lot now. But to be a kid in the 1960s meant you had Doctor Who, The Avengers, the original run of Marvel Comics, the Jerry Anderson marionette shows, the Beatles, the Kinks, the Bonzos, Monty Python, all this stuff, which probably keeps coming back for the rest of my life and for the rest of everybody's lives. This stuff, it's still current in a way that I don't know, the franchises of the 1940s or 50s aren't. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think it has a lot to do with the baby boom and the kind of demographic tyranny, but it also has a lot to do with the way media evolved, the way it was possible to have huge crazes like, I don't know, Batmania, which but I was there for that as well. So that's what was around me as a kid, along with lots of other kind of weird cultural influences. But what Dracula did, what the Todd Browning film did, was get me interested in the deep backlist, as it were. And it spearheaded quite a lot of my subsequent interests in that I became interested not just in horror movies, but in movies in general. But also, of course, I then read the book, and that took me into classic horror literature, and so many other things sort of sprung from that one wellspring. I mean, in many ways, I am still writing the Anno Dracula series, which sort of come from that, that one story, the Dracula story is something that I keep going back to, I keep dancing with, I keep going. But I'm not the only person who's doing this, right? The horror movie that opens this weekend, Abigail, right? Its
Yes.
is Swan Lake. There it is, a reference to a 1931 movie in a film that's a big release this week. It's like this stuff is lodged in all our minds and is never going away.
True,
Yeah.
very true.
And you have this famous movie, this famous character, and it does lend itself, I think in a lot of ways like Lovecraft fiction did, with being able to add to this universe. There's so many permutations.
That was another thing that it was big for me in the 1970s. In Britain, they republished all of Lovecraft's stuff in paperback with really kind of psychedelic covers.
Right.
In the way that Tolkien, became, as it were, a 1960s, 70s writer, even though he'd written the books long ago. And after it was Grafton who became Panther, or maybe it was the other way around, but they were the publisher. And after they'd done all the Lovecraft, they decided they'd do Robert E. Howard and Arthur Machen and Clark Ashton Smith and actually Frank Belknap Long. I mean, they really But all these things came out in paperback, and there was this moment of that was what horror was before Stephen King. When if you went to the horror shelf in your bookshop, what you got in Britain, there was a bunch of Pan Book of Horror Stories and a bunch of Dennis Wheatley, and then all this weird tale stuff from the 1930s, 40s, and onwards. I think the first, as it were, 20th century horror I read was a Robert Bloch collection of short stories.
Oh wow!
Which, again, actually, I mean, and those, I think Bloch is probably rather underrated as a writer now, because he's tends to obliterate everything else he did. And of course, Psycho is great, but what he did in stories like Yours Truly, Jack the Ripper, or The House of the Hatchet, or Sweets the Sweet, is astonishing. And also, I've got to say, I read those things when I was like 12, 13, and they are perfect for that. You don't have to struggle with it the way that you struggle with some 19th century fiction. Although, because we all read, I don't know, Robert Louis Stevenson, Arthur Conan Doyle, and H.G. Wells, all of whom aren't as difficult to read as Lovecraft in many ways.
Right.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you don't get Eldritch in there, then forget it.
But the conversational style that Bloch had, the contemporary feel of those, that really changed that. And of course, Bloch was still a current name, who's still writing, but I don't know, shows like Night Gallery was still doing Robert Bloch type stories. And all those things were around at about the same time. I mean, in Britain and America, the 1970s were rich in horror on television. Horror that you didn't have to nag your parents to get out of the house and go to the cinema to see. That it was, as it were, sometimes you had to nag them to stay up late because this stuff quite often was buried in the schedule.
Yes.
But there was so much good, scary, creepy, strange television.
And from the anthology films, and then you had all the TV movies, and then on top of that, you have Night Gallery and Ghost Story, and just so much. And I felt lucky to be a monster kid growing up in the middle of all this.
And in Britain, we had the Ghost Stories for Christmas and fairly regular work from Nigel Neal and David Rudkin and John Bowen and lots of other. There were people who primarily wrote for television who were great horror writers. Everybody, and now Nigel Neal tends to suck all the air out of the room because he's the famous one, but there are a lot of other. There were, in fact, people who specialized in writing horror for radio in Britain, and it's an area I'm sort of looking at a lot at the moment because almost nobody has bothered to catalogue it or but my memory, and it's true, is that for various reasons, some cultural, some economic, radio drama remained a big thing in Britain after it had essentially died out in America. And so throughout the 1970s, well into probably the 1990s, radio drama is still a thing in Britain. It's not quite as commonplace as it used to be, but there was always a use of radio as a medium to be terrifying. I've actually written for a revival of the longest running BBC radio horror franchise, which started out as Appointment with Fear and then became The Man in Black after the horror host. But that was that show transferred across the Atlantic and became Suspense, which ran on US radio for decades and then was a TV series. And the voice of the guy, Valentine Dial, who was the first and best Man in Black, was kind of the voice of radio horror in Britain for decades. My dad remembered being terrified by M.R. James stories that he'd done on the radio in the 1940s. And he was still doing it in the 70s. I remember a version of Guy de Maupassant's The Hand, which he introduced. But there's an undiscovered wealth of like feature-length horror plays on BBC Radio. And what's more, it's all online now. You can find it. Somebody archived an enormous amount of it. I mean, Vincent Price came to Britain and did a radio series in the 70s at a time when, as I say, the great age of radio drama had disappeared in America.
The Price of Fear.
Yes, indeed.
I love the fact that it was like he was sort of the host and he was in them. A la Thriller with Boris Karloff.
Right, yeah. I mean, sometimes he's written into the stories. Sometimes that doesn't work, actually. But there are I mean, for instance, the one that I think he really does work in is that Stanley Ellen story, The Specialty of the House, about the Count restaurant. And because Vincent Price was known as a cookery expert, he actually works as the narrator of that story. That was done on Alfred Hitchcock Presents as well, and I suspect has been adapted over and over.
As you got into horror, like you said, growing up in the UK, coming out of the 60s as far as horror cinema, where censorship was a lot more loose, you had a lot more sex and violence and gore.
It wasn't. But that endless wait. I mean, because in Britain, horror films were rated X.
Right.
So that said, me and most of my friends were, seeing X films for about the time we were 14. So, but a concept which I think was actually quite helpful, that horror was a grown-up thing rather than a kids thing. And I think that on the one hand, that prevented there being actually a British equivalent of the idea of the monster kid, because horror films weren't for kids. But that gave it also rather I don't know, like punk rock later on, because it was something that was a bit disapproved of, that wasn't for kids.
Forbidden.
We love all the more. Those of us who were committed to it.
Is there a way that is there like a catch-all way to summarize that decade of horror? Like, how would you define 70s horror cinema? Is there an easy way to define it?
No, because it's so complicated. I mean, it's hard enough just on a year-by-year basis throughout the 70s. I suspect that more horror films were made in the 1970s than the entire previous history of cinema. I think there was a dip after that, and it wasn't really until the 2000s, and it suddenly became possible for everybody with a phone to go out and make a horror film.
Right.
You got back to that level of productivity. But, I mean, I have no particular idea why in 1971 every film industry in the world made a bunch of vampire movies, but they did.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like under completely different circumstances, completely different cultures all around the world. Suddenly, 1971, everybody made vampire movies. and they all sort of group together and do interesting things, but they are separate traditions.
Well, speaking of 1971 and a kind of sort of vampire film, I know that there's a particular movie that we referenced our title of this episode off of that is, I think you've said, is maybe one of your all-time favorite horror films.
Yeah, Let's Get Jessica to Death. I think it's probably my favorite horror film. And it is a vampire movie.
Yes.
The Girl in the Lake is a vampire. It's also a ghost story, and it's also a psychological drama. One of the reasons I like it is that I personally relate to it in ways that I don't necessarily relate to some horror films. The circumstances of the family are very like my own. My own family moved from the city to a farm in the country and renovated it. They were kind of counterculture types. There are a ton of other 1970s TV and film stories that have this pattern. Probably because a lot of writers did exactly that. You know, they moved from where they grew up, and so you have so many stories about people moving to the countryside and creepy, scary stuff happening. So I really relate to that. There are all kinds of social undercurrents that I relate to. Also, for a long time, it was a film that very few other people had seen.
Yeah.
So whenever we were all sitting around having conversations about what was scary, I say, oh, you should see this. And nobody had, because it didn't play television. I think it's been on British television once.
Wow.
Really?
It hasn't actually been released in the UK on DVD or Blu-ray, although there are American and Australian editions of it. So it's still kind of a niche thing. And for a while, I think it's like most of the screenings it's had in Britain are my fault. But on the strength of that, I am now starting to see more influence of it or more recognition.
Appreciation. Yeah.
And this was not a big budget film.
No.
This was, and even the actors.
The interesting thing about that is because it's cast out of New York. Mm-hmm. So if you compare it with most regional horror films, which are basically like Night of the Living Dead, cast with amateurs or with whoever was around or community theatre people, everybody who's in Let's Get Jessica to Death is really good. Yeah.
Yes.
Look at their credits; they've all been in like Cassavetes films or William Friedkin films or whatever, because they're all solid, excellent actors, and that gives it, I think, a depth and a texture that quite a lot of. For instance, another film I love, Messiah of Evil.
Oh yes,
Messiah of Evil is as creepy, but it's not as textured in its characterization.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But it's that same kind of feel, though. Jessica has that different kind of realism to it, and like you said, because there were actors that you're not familiar with, there weren't stars like Peter Cushing or
Christopher
Lee, and it was not a Hammer film. It just felt almost like kind of like a little folk horror-esque, little art film-esque.
And it's more isolated too than Messiah of Evil.
Yes, it is. Yeah. I mean, Messiah of Evil has a big scene in the supermarket and the cinema.
Oh, right, yeah.
The best.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas, that said, I find both equally creepy in different ways.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's something about creepy town folk. That gets me every time.
Me too, Matt. Me too.
Yeah, having the experience of moving to the country. I mean, the film that probably most not the kind of the level of horror, but reflects the kind of people we move among is Straw Dogs.
There
aren't actually that many British horror films with contemporary settings and credible countrysides in the way that Jessica or Messiah of Evil or Salem's Lot have credible small town American setting.
Right.
Whenever you see villages in British horror films, they're usually sort of fake Transylvanian, and they're period mostly. The kind of rural horror boom, I suppose, until you get to something like The Wicker Man, and that's weirdly stylized. It's not actually like real people. It casts like a lot of dancers and comedians. It's sort of slightly closer to the League of Gentlemen, exaggerated it is.
Right.
Yeah.
They're oddballs.
Yeah, having a sexy lady bang against your wall. That's
Well, you know, when
what
Britt
you've been
Eklund comes
there?
a knocking.
My door is open. Okay.
Yes, right.
But Blood on Satan's Claw from the UK would be an early 70s exception, because there you have a rural sort of folk horror village setting, which is extremely believable.
Yeah, but it's period.
True.
Yeah.
And there are one or two other sort of period settings are credible as well. I mean, actually, I've just watched a British TV series from the 70s called Wessex Tales, which is 6 adaptations of Thomas Hardy's stories. Nobody ever lists this among the great horror shows of the 70s, but check it out. The opening show, the Withered Arm with Billy Whitelaw, is astonishing. And there's one with John Hurt, written by Dennis Potter, which is also outstanding.
Wow.
But nobody ever thinks of Thomas Hardy as a horror or a ghostwriter, although almost all his stories are about horrible, tragic, awful things happening to people.
When it comes to the tradition in Britain of doing the Christmas ghost story, when did that start? Is that something that's been around forever and then was adapted for television?
Theory, it's been around since A Christmas Carol.
Dickens.
Christmas. And I think, and the thing about that, it's actually an early example of how horror franchises work. A Christmas Carol was a huge instant success. So what did Dickens do? He wrote another one for the next year and another one for the year after that, The Goblin and the Sexton. So there's a book of Dickens's ghost stories. They're all good. None of the subsequent ones are as good as A Christmas Carol. Then there's this thing that M.R. James, the writer, he didn't write ghost stories about Christmas, but he wrote them to be read aloud at Christmas. And that's what happened in the early 1970s. Somebody at the BBC just made an M.R. James ghost story that went out, I think, on Christmas Eve. And it was popular and successful, and people remembered it. So they made one a year. It's like a series with one episode a year that ran, I think, for 8 or 9 episodes. It's been revived subsequently. And there are a couple of other sort of add-ons that fit into the tradition. And in fact, it became such a thing that other British TV channels did ghost stories around Christmas. The BBC put Nigel Neal's The Stone Tape out at Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Love that.
Classic.
There's a play called The Exorcism, which is set at Christmas.
Yes.
But it's too terrifying to broadcast at Christmas. So they put it out.
Wow.
Yeah. That was for Dead of Night, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's, again, another work of horror from the 70s that very much reflected my circumstances. I grew up in a house like the one in The Exorcism, a converted farmhouse which had really ancient bits. But The Exorcism wasn't the only TV show that had that. Witching Time and Baby and a whole bunch of other TV episodes had the same thing. Again, I think from the experience many writers had of moving to the country and buying falling down houses and doing them up. Alan Garner did the same thing with a house next to a huge radar telescope, which is a great sort of, I think it's, Nigel Neal, I think, probably refers to it in The Last Quatermass, where it has the same thing. It's like you've got a rambling old haunted house on one side of the road, and you've got a radio observatory looking to the stars on the other side. To me, that's the 1970s.
Well, and that was also the genius of Nigel Neal. I think we're all giant Quatermass fans, and
yes.
Quatermass in the Pit is like one of my favorite films of all time, and I love what he was able to do by really almost seamlessly merging science fiction and horror in the way that he did.
Yes.
And the Stone Tapes, of course, is another great example of that.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, and these were very current when I was growing up. I mean, the Quatermass serials for me are kind of like folk memory. It was what slightly older people would refer to as. It's like we'd watch an episode of Doctor Who that was really frightening, and somebody's older brother would say, "Oh no, Quatermass was scarier than that."
Right.
And so that had stuck with people. The film versions of Quatermass did play on UK TV quite often in the 70s. But I think my first experience of Quatermass was the published scripts, which Penguin had put out, and they were in our local library. I think they were in a lot of local libraries. They're very collectible now, but they had huge print runs, so that for a while they were quite easy to find. And they were reissued in with different covers in 1979 when the last serial went on. So I have 2 sets of those.
Nice. Nice. Well, does anybody else have some other titles like you guys, for as far as like 70s gems that maybe not people know about?
One thing I'd like to bring up, if we're still on Nigel Neal, when I was watching the show Beasts, I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favorite episode of the show, but it does give a little bit of a glimpse of Nigel Neal's imagination, which is Buddy Boy, where
I've heard of this one.
Yeah, you have a fish park that is being haunted by the ghost of an abused dolphin.
Wow.
It's been turned into a porn cinema.
Oh, yes. That's
really?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
I suppose that was another thing. British television in the 70s actually probably was less censored than American television. In that you'd quite often have nudity and swearing and sort of the kind of grim endings that American television was very reluctant to do.
Right.
Some of those American TV movies that I think was it Don't Be Afraid of the Dark really stands out because it has an unhappy ending.
Yes,
True.
yeah.
Which you could do on a Night Gallery episode, but on the whole, you weren't allowed to do for a TV movie.
Right.
But and in fact, one of the things I think that after a while, 70s horror, unhappy endings became so regular a thing that there's a kind of unearned miserablism that creeps in.
That's true.
I love the term miserableism. I want to turn that into a T-shirt. And then, the first thing that came to mind when you said that was Race with the Devil.
Yes,
that's one that's building you up. Spoiler alert, but it's building you up to like, hey, these kids are gonna make it, and well, not so much.
But the thing is, that's effective once when every film has that ending, which for a while was the case. It becomes just something that is as boring as the old-fashioned ending of the sun coming up and the young lovers walking away from the burning castle.
Right.
And once something becomes routine, it sort of loses its impact. And I think that because some of the stuff that was shocking in the early 70s sort of had become cozy by the 1980s. Which is why I know there are plenty of really good horror movies made in the 1980s, but they are rather less unpredictable. They get like actually a lot of 80s cinema. It's kind of smooths the edges off. You don't get the surprises; you get the shocks instead.
Right. It's a little less subversive. Well, you were talking about how there are so many vampire movies in the 70s. Another vampire movie from 73 that I really, really love and doesn't get a lot of talk even still is Lamora, Lady Dracula.
Yeah, I like that.
Which is a great film, which the alternate title is Lamora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural, which is a more appropriate title because the movie, it's like kind of like a Grimm's fairy tale meets a vampire movie set in like a H.P. Lovecraft town. It's just haunting, and it's set in the 30s, and it's this young girl played by Cheryl Smith, who is basically just seduced by this vampire woman played by Leslie Gilb, who kind of channels Gloria Holden from Dracula's Daughter, I think, a lot. But it's moody and very atmospheric, very unreal, like fairy tale quality to it. But it's that kind of movie that I discovered, like I'm sure many had discovered late night television growing up in the 70s. Like, what is this? It's like a fever dream.
What's the date on that one, Sean?
73.
Because I'm not familiar with that one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's like Jessica and Messiah of Evil. It's made by somebody who didn't make other horror films, isn't it? Rob Blackburn. He co-wrote Eating Raoul, but that's it. Right.
Right.
Obviously John Hancock and Willard Hoyt had long and interesting careers doing other things.
Right. Yeah, but it's a great one. I mean, it's just definitely one. I think it's been on DVD. I don't think it's yet been put in Blu-ray, but there's a DVD of it. Yeah.
It's beautiful to look at. It is, it's dreamlike.
Yeah.
I also Stephanie Rothman's The Velvet Vampire from around that time, which has a sort of weird desert feeling. Yeah, again, all of these things, not a lot on the plot. It's more atmosphere, which I think is maybe why they don't get revived as often as some things which are sort of tackier or more obvious.
More in your face. Yeah.
But also I think that these kind of movies, they're personal. And it tends to be things that everybody's got a couple on there. When you're doing your list of great horror films, you've got a couple in there which not everybody you know has seen. Like, I don't know, Halloween or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Psycho, Night of the Living Dead, all great stuff, right? But sometimes you want to slip another one in there to surprise people and say, yeah, but no, go and take a look at this.
Yeah, for sure.
Watch the Boogans.
I love the Boogans.
I do too. It's not actually a great film, but
it's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. And again, there are various sort of kind of the horror equivalent of off Broadway, is it? And I always somehow right now it seems easier to get acclaim for being truly terrible, for being Ray Dennis Steckler or Al Adamson, than it does for making a really good low-budget horror film that terrifies people. If you make 20 bad ones, put them out on a Blu-ray box set, and people will acclaim you.
Yeah, I never thought to see a world where we'd be like a definitive Al Adamson box Blu-ray set. Now we live in that world.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm not actually. I don't think that was a bad idea. I think it's a valuable document.
Right.
But having watched it, it's going to be a long time before I revisit those. The Shrink Wrap is still on my Ray Dennis Steckler collection. The only one of those that really has made me change my mind is the Andy Milligan box set.
I agree completely, because I got that set too, almost reluctantly, but it was like on sale. Like, I'm gonna check this guy's stuff out, and there is something about his very unique point of view and his style of movies that's kind of compelling.
Isn't it? There are things in his films which nobody else would do. And basically, you have to accept all the bad stuff to get to that.
Yes.
Well, if I could really quickly, Sean, for people who are not familiar with him, can you throw out some titles that the guy was responsible for?
Well, he's done tons of bizarre films. The ghastly ones, The Rats Are Coming, The Werewolves Are Here.
Which is at least one of the best titles of all time, although it's one of his films. I particularly recommend Seeds and Bloodthirsty Butchers is Sweeney Todd.
I mean, these are ambitious. These movies are made for like $10, and he does these ornate, like they're period pieces. A lot of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're.
What his other business, apart from being a theatre director, was he ran a vintage dress shop. So he loves making the costumes.
Yeah,
which is why it's the one quality aspect of all his films are the costumes. Yeah,
true.
Because, I mean, there's a crudeness to the way he films.
Yes.
But there's a personality there, which I think there isn't in Al Adams. And some of Al Adamson's films I like.
Sure.
But they are basically thrown together.
Yes.
And whereas Andy Milligan seems desperately to have wanted to make these things, which, is something that you're going to have to give some credit to.
Yeah. You're talking about like the punk rock aesthetic where we're going to make something. We're going to make a movie. It doesn't matter if we're trained filmmakers. we're going to put our heart and soul into this. And usually more than you would expect, you would get something that is at least fascinating. And and that's kind of my pet peeve sometimes with low budget horror films. Now, because of computers and cameras and everything, it's so easy to make a film that looks pretty slick. Again, it's the shaving off the edges of the horror. And that's one of the things that I really loved about the films from that time, is that there was a rawness.
Yeah, you could say it's sort of gatekeeping, and then you needed some kind of technical ability, and at least to be able to rent a camera.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that did, exclude plenty of people from making films. But
sure.
This was a time, but in America at least, where so many regional filmmakers made movies. There were one or two British equivalents, not that many. The British film industry is kind of structured differently. But as I say, we had radio and television making quite a lot of interesting stuff.
Right. What are some other titles you guys have?
Well, we had growing up at that time, we had a TV program called Creature Features. And what was great about Creature Features is the TV host would always say about, this film isn't very good. You may not want to watch it, Revered. And as a kid, it just made you want to watch it all the more. And I know I've mentioned this film, and maybe it's not the greatest film, but what I love about it is there was so much put into it. And also the guys behind putting it together went off to become really famous. And this was actually from 1970, the film Equinox, which I saw on Creature Features. And the funny thing is, Bob Wilkins, the host, said, the interesting thing about this film is there's this young kid named Dennis Muren. Dennis Muren, who would later go on to win countless Academy Awards at doing the effects for the Star Wars films and stuff like that. But Bob Wilkins would say, this Dennis Muren guy, and, it took them a long time to make this film. So the actors actually age during the filming.
True.
Yeah, sideburns change.
Well, exactly. And look, it's not the greatest film, but what's cool, and being a little kid and wanting to make my own horror movie, when I saw that, it made me want to make my own movies, because I thought, I can make that animated devil fly out of clay or something like that. Or I can make a big giant split screen thing. And so it inspired me. And also because as a 10 or 11-year-old watching it, this was a film made by adults. So to me, even though it may not have been the greatest film, it was made by adults, and they were doing stop motion, forced perspective. There were some cool makeup effects. They tried to put as much into this thing as they possibly could. And it was originally shot in 16 millimeter. And then when Dennis Muren had shown it, there was actually the producer said, hey, let's help you finish this. I think we could put this in the theater.
I think it was Jack Hill, right?
Yeah. And
right.
And so I think it's a film that, and actually I think it had a really nice DVD release. Recently.
Criterion, I think.
Criterion, right,
which is so bizarre. Criterion of all companies.
But it's great. It's a great example of just like a short student film. It's almost like the way Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead.
Absolutely is Evil Dead. Yeah.
Exactly. So, it's about these four, I don't want to say teenagers, college students that go out on a picnic.
They started off as teenagers. And then
they start off as teenagers. And then they get attacked, and there's this occult-like thing. And again, look, I don't want to tell people, look, it's the greatest film ever made, but it's a neat film from the 70s that I think is worth viewing and knowing where these people go on to after. Dave Allen worked on it. He did stop motion animation. Jim Danforth. These are stop motion animation giants. So
that's a great one.
That's something that I remember seeing on Creature Feature, and it's always stuck with me as like a neat 70s film that I don't think gets the praise, and people should revisit it.
For sure. You've seen that one, right, Kim?
Yes. Yeah. I think I saw that on video in the 80s. I don't think it got a theatrical release in Britain. Or if it did, it was very minor. I'm sure. I didn't get to see it in the theater. We saw it, like I said, on Creature Features, and it might have been in 73. Was the producer who picks up Jack H. Harris, the guy who made the blog?
Jack H. That's right, Harris. That's right. Yeah.
And he later picked up Dark Star, John Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon's film.
Yes.
Also a student. So obviously that was his idea. Doesn't he go find some 70-minute student film and force them to shoot another 20 minutes?
Right.
But
Right.
from a creative producing point of view, it seemed like a neat idea, especially at that time when drive-ins were still pretty popular. You know, if you could do something like that, create this second bill feature or put a couple of these films together, you made a few bucks.
Yep.
Well, I mean, speaking of a great double feature that actually is really mainly just one feature, but it made a great poster, is I Drink Your Blood, I Eat Your Skin. And I love I Drink Your Blood. I think it is it's nasty. It is a nice blend of all kinds of things. You know, when you got hippie Satanists and a rabid dog that infects an entire town. I mean, it's got everything that I want for a Christmas film.
Yes, that didn't get released in Britain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but quite a lot of these American indie horror films didn't play British cinemas, although weird ones did. I saw The Corpse Grinders came out in Britain, but like 8 years after America, it came on a double bill with Horror Hospital, which was
that's a great one.
British films that fit into this mode. But a lot of this stuff did not appear in Britain until it turned up on video in the 1980s. And so quite often, me and other sort of British horror fans would like read American magazines and see reviews of all these films and think we'll never get to see them because they were never going to play British television. Although weirdly, one or two did in a sort of slip through. I remember Super Beast played on British TV. So it's actually a really mild film with one astonishingly gruesome moment in it that presumably nobody at the channel had watched.
Is it like the operating? Yeah.
Yeah, it's an autopsy scene.
Yeah.
And it's a terrible film.
It's a pretty bad movie.
But so quite a lot of these things were sort of near legendary. I mean, I'm personally responsible for the British debut of the Worm Eaters and the Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies.
Nice.
because a friend of mine was working for a distributor and found that they had prints of these things. So I arranged for them to be shown at the Scala, which is the famous repertory cinema in London. And so it's quite a lot of this stuff was sort of lost media in Britain and had to be rediscovered. When I was writing Nightmare Movies, there was a lot of stuff that was difficult to see, and I had to sort of trade VHSs with people or do shady backstreet deals to get stuff. which now, of course, is like easily available in optimal editions.
Yeah, it's crazy how like there's a Blu-ray of Super Beast now. Like it's crazy.
But Kim, isn't it kind of cool that it's like in the 80s when that whole video craze happened and a studio would want to hold on to its A-list films, but there were all these other lower budget films that if you had it on VHS, it was like, oh my gosh, here's another piece of media. Here's another way to be seen by the general audience.
There was a strange thing in Britain where video rental took off in Britain in a way that it took a while to take off in America because Britain didn't have cable television. So there was an enormous sort of appetite for just weird movies or movies in general that was not being satiated by then 3 television channels. And so when video rental started in about 1980, and that was an absolute gold rush, mushroom growth industry. People made lasting fortunes. They went from being barrow boys to millionaires in months. I mean, and like all of these things, it was a boom and then followed by a bust. And there was also the video nasties cut off there as well.
Right.
But there was a period when suddenly you could go to your local grocery shop and there'd be a rack of videos, and in there would be Monstroid and Death Curse of Tartu. Equinox was one of those. Legend of Hillbilly John. All these things nobody had ever bothered to release in Britain, and in fact had barely been released in their countries of origin.
Right.
But every video shop in the country had had them, which is why you've got this generation of British horror fans who actually have quite a wide knowledge of stuff because they absorbed it all in 3 years. Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of that stuff now, is being looked at and reassessed and rediscovered.
You know, Kim, it's funny sometimes because we all know a lot of these films, but I think here in the 2024, some of the kids today or the people who are into horror, they don't really concentrate on something from the 70s, stuff from the 80s when there's lots of visual effects and bladder movements and, blood spattering and stuff. People forget that there's a lot of great stuff in the 70s that maybe was more atmospheric or wasn't strongly in the visual effects or whatever, but are still really great and should be explored or checked out.
I do. I mean, and this is the thing I felt in the 80s, but I feel all the stronger now, is that 80s films date in a way 70s films haven't. And I think it's something to do with the pervasive MTV style.
Oh, yeah.
It could also be to do with really stupid stuff like the fashions and hair.
Sure.
Somehow films from the 70s or even the 60s look more classical. They look, people still on the street dress like that. Yeah.
Right.
If you dress like the characters from, say, Hellraiser, you'd look like an idiot.
right.
Whereas, I don't know, look at the way the kids dress in Halloween or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's still pretty acceptable.
Yeah.
Oh, good point. Good point.
I mean, it's not. There are one or two kind of end of hippie era horror. I remember actually stuff like Cannibal Girls or whatever you get, or Welcome to Arrow Beach, where you get the kind of bizarre fashions of the era. But mostly 70s style is essentially acceptable. In a way, 80s style isn't. It's contrived and looks ugly, actually. I mean, I think that's the way. Even good-looking people in 80s films look terrible. But it's more to do, I think, with the style of lighting and stuff like the cutting or whatever that came from MTV. And I think that, there are directors who came out of that, and it wasn't just pop videos, it was advertising as well. People like Russell Mulcahy or Tony Scott, their films, they're kind of really impressive, but rather resistible. I don't relate to them. I don't find them real or scary. Sometimes I find them exciting, and sometimes they're amusing because they're visually really inventive. But they don't have that slow creepiness that you get. I think obviously in the 80s, maybe David Lynch was doing it. I think he manages to fuse 80s style with that slow burn 1970s creepiness that lasts. But I mean, I recently, again, another box set I went to, I've watched all the Friday the 13th movies.
Wow, all of them.
Because I got the big box set of all of them, and I realized apart from Friday the 13th and maybe one of the others, possibly Jason X, I'd seen all of them when they came out and had not watched them again. They're not like films that I would go back and revisit in the way that I must have watched, I don't know, the Living Dead movies or Hammer's Dracula films or Universal's Frankenstein movies. I've probably watched them, watch those cycles all the way through once every 2 or 3 years for decades now.
Right, yeah.
I watched as they came out. And so I sat down and watched them all again in a lump, and they really don't work anymore.
Well, it's funny because I love the first Friday the 13th is great. It's also a mystery film, which people forget. I like the second one, but we are big fans, especially Matt and I, of Jason X because it's so out there.
Yeah,
it's a parody.
I got a love stick at the time for giving that a good review, but I think it is by far the best of the series.
There you go.
Nice. It's great to hear from Kim Newman.
Yes.
We heard it from Kim Newman.
Always tried to defend that sequel, and it's
justified.
Great.
Finally justified.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, those. I think for us, they were so much a part of growing up, and the '80s were kind of a fun time for me. when I watch those movies, it sort of takes me, it's strange, but it takes me to a warm and fuzzy place. And I can't explain it.
I'd probably get that with some Hammer's Dracula movies or whatever, because that's what I was watching in my early teens. I mean, I remember, and I was there like opening week for Halloween.
Wow.
I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre when it was like banned in Britain and they had one screening. So, and I was there opening week of Carrie. And those are films that were huge and impactful from the start.
Right.
You can't overestimate how good those films are with audiences when people watching them don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
By the time Friday the 13th rolled around, it was, another one. And then there was a whole bunch of stuff Prom Night and Terror Train. And,
Right. Yeah.
New Year's Evil.
and
Arbor Day.
Yeah, it was like 3 years of that.
Yeah.
And I remember one critic at the time, I think in Cinefantastique, said, and he was obviously an older guy, he said, what these films are doing is for kids today, they're doing what films like I Was a Teenage Werewolf did for me and my friends in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's fair. I think that and that's why I find it really weird seeing some kind of old school horror fans like dunking on the recent films that kids are enjoying. There are kids out there. Yeah, I mean, for a while there was stuff like the Saw films or whatever. Right. But also, I don't know, The Conjurings or Ouija, or the kind of creepy ghost stories that kids like that are still bright. Even Twilight, there are still reasons for liking those films if you are of that generation.
Yeah.
In a way that I certainly relate, as I say, to films of the early 1970s that reflect my life, my situation, or even utterly ridiculous things like Dracula AD 1972, which doesn't reflect anybody's life. But I can vividly remember when people actually dressed like that and talked like that.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I do like the slasher boom of the late 70s, early 80s. I like those movies, but they're almost cozy to me now to watch. They're not because people say, I can't. Yeah, I'm not into slasher films. They're too gory. First of all, people growing up today, pick any episode of Game of Thrones or The Walking Dead. There is more gore and brutality and violence in those things than any so-called horrible slasher film from the early 80s. I mean, they're almost quaint, and it's a certain trend and a certain, they followed a certain formula. That was what was fun. I mean, they're not masterpieces, but they, like you said, they're that generation's I Was a Teenage Frankenstein or whatever.
When we would watch those movies, there was a different expectation going in as a horror aficionado. You're watching them with a different expectation of like, well, these are not going to get under your skin. It's almost like Abbott and Costello in a weird way, And then there's also, just because I think we all appreciate practical effects, they were showcases for that as well. And so that was another point of appreciation.
Yeah.
James, I had brought up Equinox. Was there a film that you liked from the 70s that maybe isn't that well known?
There's so many. One that I recently discovered was Bob Clark and Alan Ormsby's follow-up to Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things.
On my list.
From 1973, and that's Death Dream.
Death Dream is great.
So great.
Which is kind of an adaptation of The Monkey's Paw.
What's that, Dead of Night in Britain.
Dead of Night, right.
Dead of Night, yes.
Right.
Also known as The Veteran of a Night Andy Came Home.
Wow.
which is quite on the nose.
Right.
And it's it's about a soldier, and it's during Vietnam, so you can only surmise it's Vietnam, who had made this promise to his mother that he would come back. And even after the family receives a telegram that he's been killed in action, he shows up, he comes home. And the dad is John Marley. The mom is Lynn Carlin, speaking of Cassavetes actors. And he's a vampire zombie, basically.
Yeah.
And
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler, but it takes them a little while to catch on to this, even though he's behaving extremely strangely. And there's a lot of great little, character humor touches from some of the supporting cast. But mainly it's John Marley, who's the
he's
father,
so good.
and he's tortured, and it's just... it's totally his movie. I mean, he's amazing in it. And it's a tragedy, as The Monkey's Paw is. And it's the whole takeaway is, look what this does, how this impacts a family. And
Yeah,
their different approaches to a tragedy, which also in turn, Pet Sematary years later, which also draws on the same theme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like watching the slow disintegration of a family. And it also hits on like substance abuse. I mean, he needs people's blood to stay alive, and he's slowly deteriorating. It's so well acted, and it's just disturbing. It's like Children Shouldn't Play with Dead thing is kind of like a fun Night of the Living Dead knockoff, but Death Room is a more serious and disturbing film, and really well done.
And James, what's the date on that one?
73.
73 or 74, yeah.
Wow.
73, 74.
In Britain, it was released as the B feature with David Cronenberg's Ravid.
Oh,
You're
wow.
kidding.
That was an evening out.
Wow.
Whoa.
Good double bill.
Date movie.
Fit.
Again, that because that was a British circuits clung to double bills well into the 1980s. So quite often, things that were maybe 2 or 3 years older or had been skipped for release would turn up as supporting features. That's where certainly a lot of odd. Back Cannibal Girls came around with Shivers.
Both Canadian.
Badlands with It's Alive. That was another evening out.
Nice.
I love Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things.
It's a kind of weird remake of The Servant with Oliver Reed and Derek Jacobi.
Yeah.
Which really ought to be seen as a very strange film written by a fascinating guy who was the Marquis of Bar, Alexander Finn.
Wow.
It basically had the lifestyle of the kind of characters you see in horror films. He sort of had a weird commune, and it was sort of like a very posh British version of the Manson family. But he wrote a novel which was filmed in his house with Oliver Reed and Derek Jacobi. Blue Blood.
Blue Blood.
Wow.
It's on the list. Have you guys seen this?
No.
Nuh-uh. I don't know that one.
I wouldn't be surprised if it hasn't had that much of a release outside Britain.
If it has Oliver Reed in it, my gosh. I mean, why haven't I seen this?
Yeah, I do love Oliver Reed and everything. And he's definitely my favorite werewolf.
Oh,
Yes.
yes. But that's for our werewolf episode.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Sean, was there one that you like to put aside as like the special 70s?
Another one is, if we're talking ghost films, this is another ghost story that doesn't always get a lot of praise, although it has recently come out on Blu-ray finally, and that was 1977's The Haunting of Julia. With Mia Farrow. Richard Longcrane directed it, based on a Peter Straub novel, and it's really good. It's Kira Julia, Tom Conti is in it. It's a very melancholy, sad film with Mia Farrow she's like a trained nurse, and this horrible moment in the story where her daughter is choking. She tries to give her emergency tracheotomy, and it does not work, and her daughter dies in her arms. And it's just horrible. And she has this kind of a strange relationship with Cordelia, her husband, and she tries to move out on her own, trying to get her life back together. And there's something going on in this house, history of another girl who died there, maybe haunting the house. But it's really good. It is that kind of slow burn, very atmospheric, haunting kind of film, but it's great. And it has one of the most memorable final shots in a horror film that you'll ever see. It's this long single shot, and it speaks volumes what happens thematically.
It's why I prefer the British title, Full Circle, because that's what the final shot does.
You're right. Yeah, it's great.
Called Julia, but that was a Vanessa Redgrave film 2 years earlier.
Right, Julia. Right. But no, it's great. It almost reminds you a little bit of Don't Look Now in some ways.
I think, I'm sure Peter Straub would own up to that, but it became a bit of a convention, didn't it? And I think that Don't Look Now, it really works, the idea of the dead child. But for instance, The Changeling has the same.
I love The Changeling.
Yeah.
Another film I love. But then like 4 or 5 other, what was it I saw recently? A Vacancy does it, and it's like, yeah, think of another reason why this marriage is in trouble. You know?
Right, yeah.
The run of dead kids in these films is like, it's done so catteringly in Don't Look Now. It feels cheaper on each reiteration, doesn't it? To the
Right.
it becomes almost like a caricature of what's the worst thing you can do.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. Just really quickly, you mentioned the Changeling. So I showed my daughter the Changeling, and she loved it. She loved it. But then what she would do to me is, if I was in the kitchen, then I'd hear her little voice go, "My room, my room," because that's a little ghost kid. Oh, he says, "It happened in my room," and so she just thought that was hilarious to do. Play.
I would have rolled the ball in. I would have tortured you with the ball.
Yeah.
Well, she did that too, but I mean, she loved that film. So,
But
George C. Scott is just great in that. I love it.
And you know, like later, I think it was 80 or 81, Ghost Story came out with also based on Peter Straub book, and that got a lot of attention. It had a much bigger, bigger, well-known cast. But The Haunting of Julia, I think, is more effective and more disturbing.
I'm astonished no one's remade Ghost Story as a miniseries because it really doesn't work as a film. I was friends with Peter and I talked to him about it. And for him, he said just the fact that his book got made into a film with Fred Astaire and Melvin Douglas.
That's great.
And that was enough for him.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
I also think Alice Krieg is brilliant in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's got all these good things in it, but somehow as a film, it just lies there, doesn't it?
I think you're like, I still kind of enjoy it. Like I keep going back to it, and there are elements and set pieces I really enjoy. Yeah. But you're right. As overall whole, it kind of doesn't gel. You're right.
It runs out of gas.
Yeah. I'd say it's a big, complicated book as well. Terrifying to think if they remade it now, the flashbacks would have had to take place in 1982. You know?
True, that's right.
What you've got in Ghost Story, it's like the 1920s, isn't it? And they're all in like, drinking Prohibition gin and driving their Stutz Bearcat into a lake. Now, you know, and it's like you'd have to cast, I don't know, John Travolta and Kurt Russell. And,
yeah, it'd be very different.
I don't know if they would do a TV series though, but that's
maybe you never know. I mean, they keep coming back with a lot of Stephen King stuff, and I think that would be something that would be ripe for it.
But in fact, after Ghost Story, I don't think Peter had a single other movie sale. Sold options, but they didn't make any more movies based on his excellent works.
Right.
Briefly, Oliver Reed was brought up. He's one of those actors that always stands out. And for me, another actor, a staple of my horror viewing during that time was Donald Pleasance. And a big favorite of mine is a film called Deathline, otherwise known as Raw Meat.
Oh, yes.
And again, it has all the elements that I enjoy in a film. First, of course, the cast. You got Donald Pleasance and Christopher Lee and a cannibal, and you've got someone trapped in an area where they're cut off from the rest of humanity, and so they go crazy and they become feral. And this is a weird movie. For me, it's a film that gradually creeps up on you. You get all the hints of what's going on as it goes along, but the overall mood of it and the whole cannibal living in a train station thing is really unnerving.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Probably I have a different relationship with it than you do because I live in London. And it has absolutely brilliant use of London locations. I mean, I know I use that tube station. At the beginning, there's a bit where the guy walks from Soho, which was then kind of the red light district, to Russell Square tube station. And actually, it's about right, unusually for a film. It has the city's geography, and it's so much about the history of London, which is not something that crops up often in horror films. I mean, and if you look at all the, quite a lot of the great British horror films of the 70s are rural stories. They're out in the countryside, folk horror. That's the big thing.
Right.
Whereas Deathline, although admittedly it was made by an American, is a city story.
Mhm.
There aren't that many of them. And I suppose in America, eventually you get, the Driller Killer or whatever, or some
Right.
New York stuff, or even
Right.
a Russian Baby.
Or God Told Me To is
God
another.
Told Me.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Larry Cohen stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, although actually Full Circle is another London film, and there are some London ghost stories and weird sort of art things like performance. So they give you a different look at the city.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's beautiful about London as a location is that, you have this modern city mixed with all this history and they're all coexisting together. So there's a lot of material there.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, John Landis does it quite well in American Werewolf in London as
He
well.
does.
Yeah.
Again, he looks at interesting things. Whereas weirdly, I've been looking at a bunch of, as it were, foreign films made in Britain, and sometimes you can see that The Omen, for instance, is very lazy. They've obviously not done any actual research.
Whoa! Wait a minute. Are you saying The Omen's not accurate?
Put it like this. At the end, Gregory Peck is gunned down by the British police, who famously don't carry guns.
Oh, well, I thought he was a special police officer, but hey, man, I bought it.
Do you think it was like Mayberry where they give the guy a bullet and they go, okay, now you can use your gun?
No. I love that movie, but so I see the British guys are all like, oh, that would never happen. But hey,
it's not that. I mean, I don't think the American ambassador to London can hair off to a graveyard in Israel.
Hey, Kim, I don't know that. I don't know. It's totally. It seems like it's totally legitimate.
Well, to you, right? But
yes, to me, I think to most Americans. I think to all
that's
those
true.
regular Joes out there. And I mean, I don't claim to be as sophisticated like you guys. Oh, that international stuff, that wouldn't happen. I mean, I'm just saying that to me, I totally bought it, man. That was a great creepy film. And that actually is a big budget.
The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires is a perfect snapshot of China at that time.
Yes.
Which is a favorite Hammer film of mine.
Oh, mine too.
Silence.
Well, okay, no. Okay, so that's nice. But going back to some creepy kids, I think there's another film that I would like people to check it out. Was from 1972 called The Other. Not The Others, Other. And this was a film that was also shown on Creature Feature when I watched it as a kid. And look, kind of a slow burn kind of a thing. I think sometimes audiences today, you want things like, it's kind of like what Kim said about the MTV stuff, kind of moving kind of fast, or, hey, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's something really exciting. This thing is kind of a slow build when you're introduced to these two twins. And you don't really know what is going on with these two twins. And spoiler alert, I don't want to give it away as to what happens. But, there's a lot of creepy things that happen when you finally get to the end, too. And you learn the mystery about these two twins and actually this horrible thing that one of them does to a newborn baby. And the weird thing is you have, what's her name? Uta?
Ogden?
Yeah, Ogden, who's... I knew her as what? She was like the coffee lady. She used to
No.
You're thinking of the Universal Films actress.
Yeah.
Uta Hagen was a very famous acting teacher.
Yes.
But still, when I saw her, she just seems so friendly and so sweet, and so you kind of just fall in love with her, until she realizes, oh, hey, twins, we shouldn't be dabbling in this, trying to get into other people's minds and stuff. But where it goes is really cool, and I found it very, very creepy, and also because those two little boys are just terrific.
The Other has been hideously plagiarized recently. Mummy, which is literally the same story as The Other, and it's been done twice. It was done in German and then remade as an American film, and it's beat for beat the same story as The Other.
Wow.
Yeah, I was underwhelmed by that movie.
Well, the other two is always so many people I talk to say, "Oh yeah, I remember that. That was like a TV movie in the '70s," because it has that kind of '70s genre TV movie feel.
It does.
In a good way. I mean, that,
Yeah, if you saw it theatrically, it wouldn't seem like that because it's actually, I mean, it's Robert Mulligan. It's kind of an expensive film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Furious and lavish in that way that, although obviously it's a period setting, but it's not got big stars or big effects.
Right.
But there's just a kind of major studio money has been spent. Whereas if you look at Crowhaven Farm or Something Evil or all those wonderful 73 TV movies that are kind of like that, you do see the shortcuts that are taken.
Yeah, but we've said it many times. So many of the great horror TV movies of the '70s have never been released on DVD or Blu-ray. Like Crowhaven Farm is great. A Cold Night's Death.
That's one of those films I show people who think they've seen everything.
Cold Night's Death,
it always kicks. I mean, it's one of those things where everybody says, "Why isn't this a famous film?" And just because it was on television.
Yeah. Did Bad Ronald get out to you guys?
I have seen that. I don't know if it played in the '70s, but I've certainly seen subsequently. There are a whole bunch of hider in the house type.
Which another thing that freaks me out. Like I can't like the idea that there's somebody in the wall. Forget about it.
Yeah.
James, how about you? Do you have another one?
Oh, Siskel and Ebert, the critics that used to have a show on public television, championed this low-budget movie called Invasion of the B-Girls from 1973.
Right.
And it was years before I got to see it, but I am a fan of it. And I think it deserves a wider audience. It's a lot of fun. It was with the first writing credit for Nicholas Meyer.
Oh, wow.
That's right.
And it has a really fun score by Charles Bernstein, especially the opening title. And it's about a California town that's got this government experiment going on, and the women involved in the experiment. It has to do with genetics, but the women involved are trying to become queen bees in their own hive. And they're having sex with the men in the town in order to drain them of their energy.
Sure.
And
Could happen.
It's just like the craziest plot, but it's got a fun cast, mostly of TV actors and Playboy Playmates and models, Price is Right models. But it's currently on YouTube, so I do recommend Invasion of the B-Girls.
Yeah.
William Smith,
the star of that, is also in Grave of the Vampire.
That's on my list.
Right, yeah.
The first writing credit of David Chase.
That's right.
Wow.
And I think that's actually an astonishingly good, tough little film.
Yes, it's great.
And actually, the Smith and Michael Pataki, another one of those guys who's in lots and lots of things. They are both so unusually cast in this. Their relationship is so interesting. It's just at the time when vampire movies were starting to sort of break away from the Hammer Universal vision of vampires, but.
So like Count Yorga and
right, yeah. Grave of the Vampire is '72, and the concept is a great idea, which is like a vampire basically assaults and rapes a woman who later gives birth to a half-breed. It's almost like Blade.
It's Blade,
William Smith grows up to be a half-breed vampire.
And Blade was created a couple of years later in Tomb of Dracula. So
That's right. But it's great because it's kind of like William Smith's character. He's vowed to find his vampire father and kill him. And you're right, though. Pataki's so good. He's such a cool actor, and he's so good as the vampire. And they ultimately have this great actual fight. It's just a great all-out brawl between vampire's son and father.
Yeah. And I think it does a lot of things that a lot of subsequent films have done. I mean, it's like, but for the first time. And also, I think, again, you can tell it's written by somebody who's going places, because it's got that work to it, but quite a lot of I mean, I kind of like the Count Yorga films, but they're very rote.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
They're kind of flat in terms of the high concept is let's just do a Dracula film, but change the name and set it in California.
Right.
The second one has Mariette Hartley, who I think is astonishing in it. But everybody else in the films, including Robert Quarry, is just phoning it in. I mean, the attack of the direction. I think William Marshall is a better vampire than Robert Quarry.
Well,
there is something about Robert Quarry. Robert Quarry has a great voice, and I actually really like him in his unofficial follow-up to the two Yorga films, which is The Death Master.
Yes,
which is he's like this hippie guru vampire who brings in all these hippies into his commune. But that's more original concept, and he has fun with that.
I think you see the way the vampire movie is evolving in that little clutch of California set. They're all reimaginings of Dracula, but they all do different things with it.
But I do like Robert Quarry when he shows up in other movies like Dr. Phibes Rises Again or Sugar Hill, which is kind of a guilty pleasure for me because it's a silly movie, but there are some great performances. And
I think it's a great title song. Does her thing at night, and it's got Baron Samedi, who's terrific.
Sure. Don Pedro Colley.
He's better than Jeffrey Holder in Live and Let Die in that role.
It's funny too because if you watch Don Pedro Colley's character, he almost is like a Freddy Krueger because he shows up as like a taxi driver. It's really clever.
Yeah. And it probably came too late in the kind of very brief black horror cycle to become a franchise, but he should have done.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
That's a character more than Count Yorga, or in fact more than Blackula, who you couldn't have a series of films around because there was enough variation. And also has that sort of, he's a bad guy and a monster, but only ambiguously so.
Right, more like a force of nature.
Yeah, and the sort of the relationship of Sugar Hill and the Baron is sort of interesting. That actually would work as a series, whereas the sequels to Count Yorga and Blackula, both of which are probably technically better than the originals, still feel kind of flat.
Yeah, a little more one-dimensional, but you're right though. I think Sugar Hill could have done a whole franchise with that.
But by that time, it was over, wasn't it? I mean, that particular.
By the time you get to Blackenstein, it's over.
Or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Black, and that's actually not too bad of a movie.
I think Bernie Casey is terrific in that. That's a film I wish had just a bit more money. Because it's got an idea, and it does something interesting with the classic monster and actually making it, African American Californian identity.
Right.
The fact that he's a black guy who's called Dr. White, isn't he? And he's succeeded in. He sort of denies his race, and then he becomes a white monster.
It's an albino killer.
And
then the Dwayne Jones movie is.
Oh yes.
Ganja and Hess. Yeah.
I really like that, but that's one of those sort of fringe arty horror hybrids, isn't it? That I particularly warm to, but I also understand how annoying they are to some people.
It's an acquired taste. It's different, but it is fascinating though.
But I would say that one hits the sweet spot just perfectly. It offers you enough scares and art to justify everything. Another movie that I think we have to mention that is one of the oddest horror films of the 1970s is The Baby.
On my list too.
When I saw that for the first time, and it took years for me to even be aware of this movie. And when I saw it, this rarely happens, but I certainly did not see that ending coming.
And Matt, what's the year? What's the year on The Baby?
This is 1973.
73.
And it's about this social worker who visits this eccentric family, and they have this baby who is a 21-year-old man who acts like a baby. And we don't know exactly why this has happened, that maybe he's mentally deficient or whatever it is. it's sort of a question, and then as the movie unrolls, you see some reasons why this is happening to him, and it's bizarre. I think it's a really good performance by David Manzi, or David Mooney as the baby.
Yeah. No, it's talk about only in the 70s could you have a movie with that subject matter come out and be rated PG. I mean, it touches on, it's depraved and perverse, and it touches on like child abuse and incest and repression, but it really will act. I mean, you have Ruth Roman, Michael Pataki again, and Jeanette Comer, Mariana Hill. Like, it's incredible.
Another one I like from around that time is The Strange Vengeance of Rosalie.
I don't know that one.
I don't know this
story.
Is it under another title, maybe?
I don't think so.
Strange Vengeance of Rosalie. I don't know that one.
See if you can
writing it down.
Yeah. What is the premise of that one?
Oh, it's somebody gets waylaid in the desert by a strange woman and is held captive.
Ooh.
I don't know that one. Okay.
All right.
Leave it to Kim Newman to come up with the title.
Ben Howard are the leads, and it's Jack Starrett, the Race with the Devil guy, directed it.
Oh,
wow.
Matt, it's right up your alley, man.
Yes, it is.
And Kirby is in it, but it's mostly like Misery. It's a 2-character piece. But as I set in the absolute sort of desert nowhere, a lot of American horror films in the 1970s seem to be set in deserts.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, like the movie. I just watched this the other day, which is the movie.
Oh yeah, love it.
And I didn't realize that in Japan it was called Mysterious: The Vampire Human Snake.
Yeah.
A little bit on the nose.
Nice.
But it's so odd. I can't say it entirely works, but there are some odd moments of blending the movie Freaks with almost like a werewolf story in a sense. But
the British film called The Mutations with Donald Pleasence.
Oh yeah, I love that.
That also has the failed mad science experiments get sold to the circus plot.
Right.
Yeah. Jack Cardiff directed that.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good. With Tom Baker's in it. It's like the mutant, and Donald Pleasence, of course. It was released in America as The Freak Maker.
That's right.
And that's a great one. It's like almost like a sleazy 70s take on Freaks.
On Freaks, right.
Say, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
And the mutation itself is, I think, brilliant. And Shawn Sheridan, our co-host here, has a very nice statue of it that is
right here. Check this out. This is the Freak Maker guy. Yeah,
that's what
it's a Japanese company put out of this.
That's what he goes to sleep with at night.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow.
What is it? Wait, I can't.
What is that? It's Quatermass.
Quatermass, yeah.
It's Quatermass.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh.
The Quatermass experiment.
Distinctive dummies.
I have a matching Brian Don Levy somewhere.
Oh, cool. We actually, I have the Quatermass from Quatermass in the Pit with a little Martian.
Yeah, I have one of those over here.
Wow.
Nice.
Kindred spirits.
Yeah.
So for listeners, Kim Newman is going through his collection. He is showing us his action figures that he has
distinctive dummies.
Oh, wow. Grimsdyke and Dr. Terrors.
Hey guys, we need to call up Mego, man, and we need to tell them, look, here are some figures you guys need to make, because
you got to give Mego credit, because there are more Hammer characters that they've done.
Oh, Majin, yes.
Wow.
We all have that character.
Yep.
Wow.
Love those movies. That's comfort food for me.
You listeners, we're going through Kim Newman's action figure collection here.
See, it's
Very
funny.
cool.
I saw all those books, but I knew he had action figures there somewhere.
Of course.
He's one of us.
That's so cool.
Kim, this has been so fun. But I mean, for listeners, is there anything else like you can let our listeners know? Is there something people have got to see from the 70s?
There's so much.
Hidden gem.
There's got to be like maybe mention a couple more
stuff that maybe won't be so familiar. I suspect is on on YouTube, but there's a British television play from the mid-70s called Amazing Stories, which was in an anthology series called Red Letter Day. I recommend it because it's one of the first works of fiction I can think of that's set at a science fiction convention. It's about science fiction writers and science fiction fans.
Wow.
It's kind of a parody of Invasion of the Body Snatchers at the same time. Written by an American called Howard Schuman, who had a great success with a British TV miniseries called Rockfelt Follies, which everybody in Britain who saw remembers. It's kind of really similar. But this hour-long thing, which is on, let's say, I think you can find it on the internet, is well worth it. And another, I'm sure everybody by now has heard of Pender's Fen, David Rudkin's amazing play for today folk horror.
It's a folk horror thing, yes.
Yes, yeah.
But
Love
now check out Tarry Dan, spooky old scary man.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Same era that isn't half as well remembered and is really interesting.
Yes.
Wow,
Okay.
I love the title.
Wonderful performances in that one.
Okay. Have you guys seen a film that actually was written and directed, I believe, by John Ferris, who wrote The Fury and one of my favorite TV movies, When Michael Calls, Dear Dead Delilah?
I don't know this.
Oh my God, this is a great, kind of like an old Southern Gothic horror with Agnes Moorehead, only a year or two before she passed away, actually. She's the matriarch of this family who runs this Old South plantation, and she's gathered all her horrible family members because she's teased them that there's treasure buried from her late husband somewhere on the property. And of course, people start getting murdered in very gruesome ways. 72, very dark humor, has lots of bloody deaths. It's kind of, I mean, Kim, you could say it's probably in that kind of in the horror hag subgenre.
It sort of feels that there's a British film, but I again probably isn't terribly well known in America because it stars a British television comedian who's not well. So The House in Nightmare Park with Ray Milland and Frankie Howard.
Oh yeah, it's a comedy, right?
Frankie Howard. Wow.
Yeah.
Sort of a comedy. It's actually scarier than quite a lot of series.
Really? Okay, I think I've seen that. Let's see that again.
There's a sequence in there where Ray Milland and family perform their music hall act, which is one of the scariest things you'll see. And it's in the middle of it's the same formula as The Cat and the Canary. It's a comedian goes to a haunted house with a creepy family who want to kill him. And there's also treasure in the grounds and an inheritance and eccentric relatives and all that kind of good old creepy old house stuff.
Right. That's okay. I have to check that out.
In a kind of unnerving, creepy way that I thoroughly recommend. Again, I suspect because Frankie Howard was like a sort of UK showbiz legend, sort of Rod Field level, but not
the Carry On movies.
Yeah, he was in one or two of those, but his big success was the London stage run of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum in the Zero Then a show called Up Pompeii, which was a spin-off from that.
Yeah, Up Pompeii. I remember that show.
But he has a very distinctive style, which he tones down, rather like Bob Hope does in The Cat and the Canary in The House in Nightmare Park. A ham actor who's invited to do a recitation for the creepy family.
Nice. That reminds me, Kim, you and Monster Party have something in common, and that is we've both done Blu-ray audio commentary for William Castle's remake of The Old Dark House. You did the Indicator Blu-ray with Stephen Jones, and we did the Mill Creek Hammer set. Yeah, so we did the commentary for the film also. From that set.
A little differently,
Yeah, but it's cool. They're good companion pieces.
We gave some great information.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. We had a good time with it.
Yeah, that was fun. Some other titles?
One of the things that I just recently picked up, we were talking about the ghost stories for Christmas and all the wonderful M.R. James stories, and I picked up this PAL set called Ghost Stories for Christmas, and it's a 6-disc set. It's not all 70s. The first one, and one of my favorites, is Whistle and I'll Come to You, and that's 68. But there's 2 versions on this set. There's the Jonathan Miller one, and then they do a remake with John Hurt. Yeah, I love this set.
Yeah, I think I'm on.
You know what?
Yeah,
I haven't gone through all of it yet, so I'll find you.
Yeah, I did commentary tracks on some of those. Yeah,
fantastic,
nice.
Yeah, such a great series, and I wish we had something like that in this country, because there are certain type of stories where you don't have to go overboard. Just tell it. Just tell the story, create an atmosphere.
A thing I was complaining about earlier of Britain only having 3 TV channels in the 70s meant that we did stuff like that, because there wasn't the pressure that that American television feels that people have got alternatives. It's
right.
Like if you put something out, if you started watching something on TV, you were probably going to finish it, even if it was a bit slow and strange and you didn't quite know where it was going. Because, hey, if you turned over, it was probably just a darts match, or whereas in America, if you look at all those great American TV horror films in the 70s, they all have like teasers up front with a bit of action to try and grab you in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah.
And some of them, I think, compromise their general creepiness.
But you're right. You're kind of like a captive audience watching that stuff. That's what you watch.
Also, on the BBC, we didn't have commercials either, so that there's not that switch over point.
Right.
Although some of the best British TV in the 70s was on the commercial channels. Beasts was on ITV, the commercial channel.
Has anyone ever seen Happy Mother's Day, Love George from 1973?
No,
I know of that one.
I don't know that one, James.
And it's the actress who's Patricia Neal and Roll's daughter, who's astonishing and never did anything again.
Right. And she looks just like her mother.
Yeah.
And she's, even though it's supposed to take place in New England, she's speaking with an English accent, and that has to be explained in the script, why she's speaking that way. But it's mostly interesting for the people in it. I mean, it was produced and directed by Darren McGavin.
Wow.
And it stars Ron Howard with black hair. And this was right around the time he was making American Graffiti, as a kid who goes to this coastal village to try to find his natural parents. And his birth mother is Cloris Leachman. But the deep, dark secret of the town is that Cloris Leachman had slept with Patricia Neal's husband. And so they had to give Ronnie Howard up for adoption to avoid the scandal. But this was McGavin right between the Night Stalker movie and the Night Stalker TV series.
Wow.
And he hired Simon Oakland to play the local cop in it too.
Nice.
And this was also Bobby Darin's last role.
Wow.
There's just amazing people involved in this.
Klaus, who directed Enter the Dragon.
Robert Klaus, yeah, wow. Well, I'm sure, like yourself, Tim, we're all huge Kolchak fans.
Tessa Dahl, who is astonishing in this film, and as I never worked again. So, even though she gets an introducing credit.
Which actress?
Tessa Dahl, but
Tessa Dahl,
they never worked again.
The daughter of Patricia Neal and Roald Dahl.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that I have to check out for sure.
Yeah.
I tend to think of that on a double bill with the other, with Yuletide, My Mother, the Mark Johnson film.
Yes.
Which is another kind of weirdly creepy old woman film, isn't it? Sean Barbara Allen is the weird girl in that. And it's the other Richard Thomas.
Right.
Weird credit. Yeah.
That's a good one.
We have our work set out for us.
Yes, we definitely do.
Yeah.
I've written down, and James, you surprised me. I've written down yours too. You've given me some neat films I have to search for and check out.
It was a magical decade. I mean, you know, there was so much going on between independent film and Hollywood. I mean, we were fortunate, I think, growing up in that decade because we were exposed to so much great stuff, and it made us the monster kids that we are now.
Yeah, it's funny because recently, the 80s horror gets a lot of publicity and talk now. And I think in some ways the 70s era in general for me is my favorite time of movie making still. But yeah, the horror stuff in that decade though was really really memorable and really unique and sticks with you.
Yeah.
You know?
And sometimes because of all the big elaborate effects films that have happened over the past several years, I think it's easy people overlook the 70s. Sure, everyone knows The Exorcist. Okay, maybe it's the most famous horror film of all, but it's like all these other films, Sean, that we've been talking about that
For sure.
I think people need to check out.
I like The Exorcist, but I prefer The Possession of Joel Delaney.
Oh, really?
That's a good one. I like that one.
And that's one of those, because again, not many people have seen that. And I always tell people, okay, if you're upset by The Exorcist, I can guarantee a thing happens in the last 10 minutes of this movie that will shock you. And
I'm in.
It's not true, but it really will.
Kim, what was
this film, which is so strong that I imagine it would not get put in a film today.
Kim, what's the date on that film? I'm just curious.
72, I think.
72?
Yeah, early 70s. Yeah.
It's
Wow.
for The Exorcist. Shirley
Wow.
MacLaine was in The Exorcist because she was in The Possession of Joel Delaney,
Oh.
even though Chris McNeil is based on Shirley MacLaine.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
The possessee in that is Perry Smith, Perry King.
Very
Perry
good.
King.
And I've made that mistake before, which is probably
Hey, it's a lot of information we've got crammed in our heads. So,
Well, this has been a delight.
This has been so much fun.
Yeah, Kim, really.
Thank you, Kim, so much for being with us. You're just a wealth of information. This has been such a joy. Now, just out of curiosity, is there something you're working on that our listeners can check out, like in the next 6 months, or?
Well, actually, the next thing I've got coming out is a novella which will be out at Christmas, and it's called A Christmas Ghost Story.
Hey!
And it's a story about a woman who is haunted by the memory of a ghost story that she saw on television in 1979, which nobody else did.
Oh, wow.
Great.
Nice. Kind of like a Candle Cove kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Like from Channel Z. Yeah.
So
okay.
good.
Well,
Like
Kim,
it.
you have to keep us posted. So we want to remind our listeners about that, because that just sounds really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And,
And, anytime you want to come back, we would love to have you back anytime.
Well,
And
I am available.
great.
And this is great because this is, I think, our first Zoom with somebody on another continent. So,
Oh, really?
yeah. So I'm glad it worked out technically wise.
For listeners, do you realize where Kim Newman is coming from?
from old London town.
There's darkness outside.
Yeah, that's right.
Look at that.
Nice.
And we're barbecuing. So it's like, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think it was David Scow was the one who actually gave us your contact info. We've had him on our show many times, and he's great. He's a good friend.
Yeah.
So, so no, it was really a pleasure to have you, Kim. And we're always following your stuff and your commentaries, your interviews, and your stuff is so good. And you're a kindred spirit for sure.
Well, what do you guys say we raise our glasses?
Yes.
And toast Sean to what 70s horror and Kim
Let's
Newman?
scare Kim Newman to death.
Yeah.
Let's scare Kim Newman to death.
Yeah.
Time for a listener shout out.
Shout out.
Scare to death. Shout out.
That shout out reminds me of the 70s, James.
It's a groovy shout out.
I got my flares on. I'm ready.
And this one is special because I want to send out a special thank you to all the listeners and friends and family who voted for us, who took the time to email in their vote for Monster Party as best podcast and write in possibly for best commentary for Giant Gila Monster.
Yes.
Because we realize how busy people are in this day and age, and taking the moment to do that. And it's, if you enjoy the show and you were happy to do it and you did it with enthusiasm, then that makes it all the more special. So really we all appreciate you taking the time to do that.
But if you didn't vote with enthusiasm, and if you just like, no, I guess I'll just vote, that's fine too.
Yes, because every vote counts.
That's true.
Even if you were half asleep or under the influence, that's fine.
Right.
Because
If
it's
you're
still
on
voting it.
crystal meth
That's
and
what
you're like,
matters.
it'd be really weird. Let's go for the rondos.
Every vote counts.
Yes.
And
right.
I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Sean, I think you have a shout out as well.
Well, yes, and I also just wanted to thank everybody who tuned into the Collector's Call episode featuring Gina and myself.
Ah, that was
And
such a
Matt
great-
and Larry.
It's
Yeah.
such a
And
great
Matt
episode.
and Larry.
Yes,
That's right.
Matt and Larry.
And the rest.
And the rest. Yes.
That was such a fun episode.
It was so fun. Everybody involved with the show was great. Gavin, our expert, Lisa Welchel, of course, was so lovely, and it was a really fun show. It really turned out good. I didn't know how for sure it was going to come out once it was all edited together, but it was great, and it happened to be also a really nice promotion for the Monster Party, the podcast too.
It really was.
It was,
And it
was
turned
great.
into a nice little viewing party too, where we all had a
yes, it
nice
did.
time with each other. There was somebody missing. I'm trying to put my finger on the name.
Yeah, one monster partier.
Yeah.
I know, but who knows?
Somebody was just sitting by the pool, oiling himself.
Right. But and thank you all our listeners to the podcast too, who commented on our social media about it, and it was really fun. So very enjoyable.
Nice.
So it's like I did an episode, and Matt did an episode, and Sean, you've done an episode.
That's right. Who's left?
And the rest.
And I can say that I just recently replugged you, James.
Oh,
that's right.
Because I love you.
Oh,
and I have to say I plugged you as well.
I did too.
Sure, you're gonna get a call, and it would be
We'll
great
see.
if all four of us could have been on Collector's Call.
Yeah.
So maybe next season. Maybe next season, James.
Thank you, guys. There's nothing I love more than being plugged.
Oh, I see. It just changed. Okay. Wouldn't it be funny though if after all this plugging for James to get on the show, what he gets on is Hoarders?
Right.
Oh,
but wearing his Monster Party T-shirt, so that makes all the difference.
That'd be good.
I've been called a hoarder before, and I was like, I had to make the distinction. I think the difference between me and a hoarder is I'm organized. That's the difference between me and a hoarder.
True.
Everything's on where it belongs on the display shelf. So
Sure.
there you have it.
Yeah. You don't have the stuff piling up outside your house,
Oh,
You're right.
and there's a couple dead cats under it. It's not like
God
that.
forbid. No.
Okay, yeah. No, see, we're fine. We're fine, everybody. No need to worry. We're fine. And hey, folks, let me remind you that we are going to be at Monsterpalooza coming up very soon, right, guys?
That's right.
We can't wait. It's going to be great. Monsterpalooza takes place at the Pasadena Convention Center, and it's happening May 31st through June 2nd. So I would say if you haven't got a ticket already, you need to go and find one. You need to get one, because if you go on the day, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah,
if
it might be
it's going to be sold out or not. So, but there's going to be a lot of great exhibitors and guests. And they always have their monster museum with lovely statues and artwork and so forth. And it's going to be a really good time. And so if you go, you need to find us, come to our table. We'll put you on the mic. We would love to meet you. We love meeting our fans.
Yes.
And if you feel like you want to bring a gift, like many, Monster Party fans have, you can bring a gift to us too, right? I mean,
yeah.
I got
maybe one for all of us. I don't know.
Oh, well, yeah. Or if it's if you just
because it doesn't. If you think about this logically, it doesn't make a lot of sense to get the guy a gift who is constantly talking about how much shit he has, how great it is. Maybe take pity on the rest of us.
Oh yeah.
Oh, little moment of silence there. I get it.
And yes, don't wait for the day of the show to get your tickets, because then you'll find out it'll give Deathline a whole different meaning. So
yes, nice, very nice, James. Nicely done.
Now, one thing that you'll be sure to find at our booth at Monsterpalooza is Monster Party merch. And
Right.
if for some reason you can't make it to Monsterpalooza, don't worry, you can still find the merch on our eBay store, which is called, easy to remember, Monster Party Store. Or if you go on eBay and just type Monster Party Podcast, you'll find everything. The legendary Monster Party cap, Monster Party t-shirts, Monster Party shot glasses, Monster Party PPE masks. And if you order merch and also happen to be a Patreon member, we will throw in free surprise goodies, courtesy of our friends Jason Lindsay and Biff Bang Pow Toys and creature creator extraordinaire Ted Haynes.
That's right.
I think both of those people were alive during the 70s. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, they were.
And, I honestly, I've been so excited to have Kim Newman on our show that I've completely forgotten
where's this going?
What this Patreon thing is all about. I just, my mind is a blank right now. I'm just too excited. What is this Patreon you speak of?
I see. Well, unlike the way the creepy townsfolk scared Jessica to death, Patreon scares you to life by shocking you with bonus Monster Party material you can't find anywhere else. And we're talking stuff like our exclusive audio episodes, our special shows like Monster Party Masterpieces and Monster Party Presents, and our ongoing Toy Time series, which is very popular and we love doing. And the behind-the-scenes convention footage that we always do, and our legendary video diary of our trip to Japan, which is so good. It's just like being there. We also have vintage horror and sci-fi collections that are edited by our resident Lyscarian, John Bordeaux, and there's just so much more.
Wow. Well, it sounds fantastic.
It does, doesn't it?
I gotta say though, I'm saving my pounds to buy British Blu-rays of Kim Newman commentaries. So I don't know if I can afford this embarrassment of riches. How much is it?
Look, I don't want to cut into what Kim Newman is making. So if you're going to give him money, I don't even want a part of that. But I will say this: for the price you might pay an 18th century dry cleaner to get the blood out of Satan's claw, you can become a Monster Party patron, and that price is just $5. $5 a month.
That's pretty good.
Yes.
You can't get a custom action figure off of Etsy of the baby for that price.
How dare you?
Which
now I want one.
Yeah, which doesn't exist, but I wish it did.
Yes, right. Yeah. I'm going to start working on one right now.
Well, that's something I can afford. That's something anybody can afford. How do you sign up for this?
Well, all you got to do is you go to patreon.com, you go to Monster Party, you click join, you follow the instructions, and next thing you know, you'll be happier than a young James Gonis with a brand new McCabe and Mrs. Miller lunchbox.
Oh, if only. And hey, let's remind our listeners that we are on the social media. We are on the Facebook at Monster Party TV, the YouTube at Monster Party TV, the Twitter, now known as the X, at Monster Party HQ, and of course the Instagram, also Monster Party HQ. And hey, whatever platform you're listening to us on, we would love the review from the Monster Party listeners. So please take a moment, send us your thoughts. I would love to hear from you, and we will read it on the air.
And we won't just read your review on the air. We'll print it on a huge bolt of denim and turn it into bell bottoms.
Ooh.
On that note, I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Stroth.
And I'm James Gonis.
Keep America strong!
And unearth your own hidden 1970s horror gems.
Groovy.
Dynamite!
Right on.
Sit on it, Jessica.
You sound good, actually, Larry.
I don't know if I'm going to get good. I don't know if I'm going to get riled up on this one. This is
Oh, I
Come
beg
on,
to
Larry.
differ.
Get riled.
That's
really
gonna happen.
You think so?
Does it have a,
Messiah of Evil. That's
Is there-
no. It's not even in the same league as Godzilla versus Kong.
Oh,
does everybody everybody else sound good, Matt?
Testing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Test. Cool.
Yeah, again, the best part about that whole franchise is the marketing.
no,
merchandise.
All right, I haven't seen any, not that I really care that
Sean.
much about spoiler. I will see it, but I'm gonna wait till it goes to streaming.
No,
Sorry.
don't wait that long.
I mean,
we
if you're
gotta
going to
be
enjoy it at
current.
all, you should see it in a theater.
Okay, we'll try to.
Because-
Maybe we will
because-
try to see it.
Go to
We
a
can.
matinee, but it's like because it's current. It would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
great. It would be great to like have a little thing about it somewhere.
Oh no, of
argument.
course.
Like the
we'll
next
talk
episode.
about. Yeah,
I don't
we'll
want us
try
to
see
wait
it.
like 2 or 3 months down the
Yeah,
road.
yeah.
It's like that.
Okay.
That ship is
We'll try.
But you
Okay.
liked it more than Godzilla versus Kong?
Well, I don't know if I should.
Let's
Go
wait.
into
Let's
the
wait
details.
to
We'll save
discuss
it. We'll
that.
save
I
it.
can-
We'll
we
save
can
it. Okay.
I mean, I'm going to spoiler alert just to say that I liked it more than I liked Godzilla versus Kong.
Okay.
That said something.
Yeah, I mean, it says very, very little. Still, we're not talking about anything remotely good.
What was hilarious though was because Matt, Carrie, and I, we saw it with Ken and Mel, and oh my god, I never thought Ken really went off, man, and Mel loved it, and it was really cute.
I don't know if she loved it.
Oh, she enjoyed it.
Again, how you lie is amazing. Hey,
Ken.
Oh,
Hello.
Kim, can you hear us?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Yes.
How's it going? Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Welcome.
So it's 8 p.m. your time right now? Cool, awesome. Just talk a little bit. I'll make sure we can hear you good.
Fine. I'm just about to have some coffee.
nice.
Nice.
Wait, coffee? Coffee? Not with vodka? Is there vodka in it or?
Well, thank you so much for being here. We're very thrilled. I like every time I see you in a DVD or Blu-ray extra, you always have that great background of all those books and DVDs and CDs, all the physical media in the background, which I love.
Oh,
Like
that
us.
is mostly in this room. So yeah.
Very cool.
But I think all of us have some variation of that room.
Yes,
in our
yes.
place, or several rooms. Like with my wife always complains that it bleeds out because there's
For
a lot
sure.
of stuff out there.
It goes into the living room and then it creeps into the dining room. And well, it's just one item. Well,
Every-
it's a couple items.
Yeah, every once in a while I'll put something in a place, and my wife will go, "What's that doing there?" Which means, "Oh, okay, this is collectible non grata."
And he has a spectacular bathroom. All haunted mansion.
Disneyland
Themed.
Haunted Mansion, because if you're gonna go, that's the way to go. And we won't just read your review on the air. We'll print it on a huge bolt of denim and turn it into bell bottoms.
Ooh.
See, and I didn't even say, no, we're not going to do that.
No, we're not gonna do it. See, you're learning.
I just
All
let
coming
it go.
around.
I let it go.
I would have said groovy,
Yeah.
but I already said groovy. So
Groovy.
right on.
I'll
Right
fix it in
on.
post. Freedom Rock. We'll turn it up, man. Anybody? Do
Dynamite.
you remember the Freedom
Ooh.
Rock commercial?
That sounds. Is that like for the album? Like the
Yeah. It was like one of
yeah.
those Kate Tail kind of
Yes, I
collections.
remember that.
And they had the
Turn
the,
up,
the,
man. Yeah.
the hippie guy. Is that
Yep.
Freedom Rock? Yeah, man. We'll turn it up.
That's like, hey, good looking. I'll be back to pick you up later.
Yeah, or the hits of there was a double album like that was for soul hits,
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
and they had these two guys, and one of them goes, "Can you lend me your copy of #1 soul hits?" He goes, "No, my brother, you got to get your own."
Nice.
I can already say I'm sure these commercials are on YouTube, and for that, thank God for YouTube.
I know, right?
Sure.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, one
All
thing
right.
about the 70s, I was watching Invasion of the B-Girls, and they used the word term ballin'. Instead of like screwing, it was ballin'. Oh, you guys are ballin'. Nobody uses that term anymore.
Ballin' like fucking?
Yeah,
Yeah.
balling. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be a term.
It used to be a lot, yeah, especially
Oh, yeah. Was that
even
is
the
that in
80s too.
is that in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Do they
Oh, probably.
I think so. That was on just the other night, and I was watching it.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
always good?
Groovy.
Dynamite.
Right on.
Hold on. I just loved. It was perfect.
That
There's
was
nothing wrong.
great.
It's great. It's just I love James's work, and he affected me. He touched me. He touched my heart.
You broke Matt up, James.
You made me laugh.
That's hard to do.
Yeah,
Oh.
I have so much hate in my heart. And anyway, so here we go.